Hey folks, this is Corey Kupfer. I hope everybody is doing well out there. Listen, this is the first video that I'm making specifically for my YouTube channel. I uploaded an old speech previously, but this is the first one that I'm making. And a few things about it. It's not the video I anticipated to make originally. You know, my YouTube channel is going to be all about authenticity in business, inspiring authenticity in business so that companies profit and people prosper. And it's going to be a lot of business content around authentic negotiating and authentic deal making and building authentic business relationships and authentic conversations about difference, which maybe is a little more relevant to this conversation. But, and also, I got the studio set up in our home. Some of you saw that on a previous video that I just put out on like Facebook Live. And we have this fancy equipment, this DSLR, I think that's what it's called. You see how much I know, camera, and this phenomenal microphone. And I don't even know how to work it yet. So I'm doing this on my iPad, which is why I have this on for sound quality. There's some things that can't wait. So I hope you hear me out. I hope you'll listen to this, especially directing this video to people who identify as white folks. Men and women, although us men have even a bigger role in this, but I'm hoping everybody hears me out. I invite respectful comments in the comments section. Again, respectful comments, here we go. So what I want to talk about is all this stuff that's happening around that was triggered by Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, President Trump's recent comments. The NFL boycott movements on both sides, but really what that brings up in terms of the larger issues around race relations, around privilege in this country, and around understanding history, and around all these opinions that are going around. So the first thing is this. A lot of people have said, and I've had some back and forth with people, though I try to avoid these unhealthy back and forths on social media, around, hey, everybody's entitled to their opinion. And well, yes and no. So obviously, I think we would all agree if somebody had an opinion that it was okay to shoot people at will in a movie theater or whatever, their opinion would not be as valid as anybody else. And I'm not making this example to put any side's opinion in that category. I'm just making an example that by definition, all opinions are not equally credible. And I want to talk about how do we distinguish between what opinions we should give creed to. So our opinions all come from our own life experiences and our own things that we grew up with, and we form certain filters through which we see the world. And I get somebody who, let's say, maybe has a military background or a lot of family in the military and has grown up with a lot of pride around the national anthem or the flag, has very strong feelings about that. And that might be their life experience. Just as somebody who's grown up, especially people of color, who have had different experience in this country that have them not be as excited about those symbols, or maybe view their protesting as the way they present their patriotism, as their form of patriotism. They feel it just as well. So I hear people saying, hey, each is entitled to their opinion. And then there's even a lot of judgment, obviously, about the other side's opinions. And so I want to discuss that a little bit and give a little history and encourage those of us, especially who are white folk, who have traditionally been, even though it may not be our personal experience, have been in the group that has the power and the privilege, throughout this country's history and in the world, and try to give some perspective on this. So a few things. Number one, if you look at history, and this is one of the biggest points I want to make, I've spent a lot of time studying the civil rights movement, all kinds of other issues in history, and consistently, when there is an oppressed group, whether it's a racial minority, right, whether it's African Americans during slavery or Jim Crow, whether it's women who were seen as second-class citizens, not allowed to vote, was seen as not being able to do certain jobs, whether it was during apartheid in South Africa, where the white majority had a certain opinion of what the system should be, which denigrated black people, okay? Obviously, slavery in the U.S., where black people were property and counted as three-fifths human beings, but that was really just for the purposes of giving slave owners credit for how many slaves they had. And I can go on and on and on. When we look back, at the time those things were happening, the people in power and control, who happened to be white folk and mainly white men throughout most of history and even today, okay, had certain opinions about the right and wrong, about the viability, about the other groups, okay, that they asserted strongly and certainly thought were not only equal to, but superior to the opinions of the people who were oppressed, who were impacted by this discrimination and this unfair system. And the same is true, right, for oppressed Jews in Nazi Germany, or during the Russian pogroms, or in Spain in the 1400s. And listen, I don't want to go, if I've left out, there's thousands of examples of oppression like that. I can talk about it. If I haven't specifically mentioned yours, it's not because I'm invalidating it. It's just because I want to get to my point. Every time that I'm aware of, I don't know of an exception, that we have gotten years down the line and history has looked back on slavery, on Jim Crow, on women's rights, on apartheid, on Nazi Germany, on and on and on, whose opinions were seen to be right in the light of history? Was it the people in power? Was it the people of privilege and the oppressors who had control, who were creating a narrative that not only did they potentially believe in or at least use to their advantage, but that in many cases, the majority of white folk at least went along with? Some agreed with it, some at least didn't fight it and went along with it. Or has history shown that it is the opinions and the views of those who've been oppressed that have ultimately been proven to be right? Nowadays we look back and people like Muhammad Ali, who stood up for what he believed in at the expense of his heavyweight title and money at the time, etc., of course, are now revered heroes, right? Where Martin Luther King, who was not somebody who was popular for a long time, has a holiday named after him. Where all the people who did the groundwork, that a lot of people give King credit for, not that he wasn't a great man, he deserves it, but the Diane Nashes and the Jim Bevels and the Jim Farmers and on and on and on, the people on the ground who sat in on the lunch counters and trained people in nonviolence during the civil rights movement, all of those people and their viewpoints, right? Those people were not seen as having the right opinions. The opinions of the majority and those in power, were seen as more valid, not just equal, but more valid. And so I defy anybody to give me any example of where that hasn't been the case, of where the view of the oppressed group at the time is not seen in history to have been the correct or valid view. And by the way, if you're sitting there trying to think of an example to prove me wrong, think about why you're doing that. Because even if you come up with one that I can't think of, it'll be 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000. So how does that apply to today? Out of our life experience, some of us may have views that disagree with Colin Kaepernick, that disagree with people kneeling, that disagree with either what they're protesting about, the validity of the issues that people are bringing up, or the way in which they are protesting them. And if you study history, that's exactly the same attitudes that people in power of privilege, white folks, have held in the past. And you know what, folks? We've been wrong. So when I judge our opinions or certain people's opinions, or even my assumptions, right, despite the work I've done in this area, against those of the people of color, those of the oppressed folks who are complaining and protesting, instead of, what I have learned to do is, instead of assuming that my opinions are right, that my life viewpoint is right, because of my study of history, not if one other person of a different background says it, but if there's the level of consistency, right? even close or anywhere close to what we see now with regard to the issues raised in the NFL boycott, Colin Kaepernick, President Trump's statements, etc., then my assumption has actually become, because of evidence, of historical evidence, that I'm going to assume that the oppressed people protesting are right. And I'm not only not going to judge them, but I'm going to look at, and I encourage you to look at, the reasons for your assumptions, etc. And even if you can't see right now, because you know what? All of the people I'm talking about in the past, right? The people, the slave owners, and all of the non-slave owners who supported that institution or didn't rise up against it. The people who supported Jim Crow, the people who felt women weren't equal, the people on apartheid in Nazi Germany, the people who were against gay rights and gay marriage, you name it, okay? Transgender folks even more recently. All of those things, people held those same strong beliefs based upon their views, their filters, whether they were religious, whether they were moral, whether they were any justification that came up. And they were honestly held by a lot of them. So I would suggest that, so here's my request. Study history. In light of what history has shown us, open up your minds. Take on the assumption that the people of color who are protesting in this country are right. Because history we'd be the exception if people who look like us were right with our opinions. So open your ears, listen to what they're saying, ask questions. But here's the key thing, right? It's not up to them to educate us. Too often, once we get open and a little engaged, we go to folks, to African-American folks, to Latino folks, to Asian folks, whoever it is, and we want them to educate us, all right? It's not their job. We need to do it on our own. We need to educate each other as white people of conscience who are willing to give up some of our privilege, right? To have a more fair and equitable world, right? Holding our privilege in place doesn't only hurt others, but it hurts us. It takes something to hold on to that. And it's scared to let it go, okay? But if we want to live in a world which values all human beings, which helps everybody come together, and my biggest commitment in life is to bring people together across perceived differences so that we realize we're all one. So let's not wait, folks. I mean, you know, what's happened, for example, in the civil rights movement was that there were a lot of people doing amazing work on the ground before a lot of white folks woke up to what was going on. There were sit-ins and lunch counters. There were nonviolent protests. There were people who put their lives on the line. And it was only after things got to an extreme. It was only after the fire hoses and the dogs. It was only after those 4 little beautiful girls were killed at that church that white people woke up and started standing alongside people of color. So I'm asking folks to open their eyes right now and do your own research, right? Read Ta-Nehisi Coates' work, read Tim Wise, read Paul Kivel, read Fandeka's Learning to Be White, read Taylor Branch, America in the King Years, or David Halberstam, the Children, or, I mean, there's so many resources out there talking about where you get a deeper understanding of all of this. So that's my request. I'm just taking a look to see if there's anything else. You know what? I'm not even worried about my notes. So that's my request, folks. Bottom line is history has shown us that the assumptions we make as white folks and the opinions we have actually are not as valid most often, or in these key situations, as those of oppressed people who are talking about their oppression and what's going on. And that doesn't mean that we haven't come to our opinions, a lot of us, honestly, based upon our own life experiences, that we may not see things because we don't have the life experience that a lot of folks of color have had. But what it does mean is that, and it's counterintuitive, that our opportunity, based upon history, hundreds and thousands of years of history, and I can give so many other examples, is to assume that their views are valid. And if we cannot see some of the things they're saying, to educate ourselves and be open, and certainly not judge their protests, certainly not judge the way. I mean, that's another thing that's happened throughout history is we have judged the way or the place or the time that people have chosen to protest. And you know what? It's not about our convenience. It's not about us being upset because our escape entertainment of NFL football is now being ruined by politics. It is not about, us. That is part of our privilege to be in a position where we think we have a right to tell people how and when to protest, and it needs to be when it is less offensive or less convenient for us. So listen, I know this video is probably going to maybe lose me some friends or, be inconsistent with expanding my business, but that's not important to me right now. What's important to me is that we stand with people who need our support as allies, as people who are willing to do the work internally within ourselves and also amongst each other and do our own research, and who understand that history compels us right now in this day and age, okay, to at least listen and hopefully be open to and support what people of color are trying to tell us here and now in this time. So I thank you for listening. Like I said, I was compelled to do this, but I was also a little afraid. And so the other thing I encourage you all to do is if something scares you a little bit or a lot, that means that's a signal it's time to stand up and take it on. So I thank you all for listening. I look forward to your respectful comments. I hope this has inspired you to take action, even if it's just to read some stuff and get educated. I love you all, and I am hopeful and prayerful for our human evolution and for a greater world when we all realize we're interconnected and we're all one. Thank you.